Welcome, everyone, and thank you for joining us for our Perspectives on Philanthropy webinar marking the release of the Giving USA 2023 report. I'm Rick Happy, the chairman of CCS Fundraising. CCS is the world's premier fundraising consulting firm. We help nonprofits create transformational change and have been doing so for 75 years. There's one thing I've learned in my journey at CCS, it's that philanthropy is resilient. We've learned this many times over the years, particularly during the past several years. Every year, we look forward to hearing the Giving USA report from our friends at the Lilly School. But I am and always will be bullish and optimistic about the current and future giving climate and American philanthropy in general. CCS is privileged to continue our partnership with the Lilly School. And thanks to Dr. Una Osili for being here with us today. This morning at 8 a.m. Eastern Time, the Giving USA report data embargo was lifted. And you're among the first to hear and see this information. But before I introduce our speaker and panelists, I want to highlight this year marks the first year that the Lilly School has its first professional doctorate in philanthropic leadership cohort. Congratulations to all the members of that cohort who will ultimately receive their professional doctorate in philanthropic leadership upon completion of the program. Applications for the second cohort open on July 1. CCS is delighted to have our own alumna of the Lilly School Master's Program. I'd encourage all of you to explore the school's wide array of educational offerings. Digging into Giving USA data is part of both the master's and PhD experience. My colleague from CCS and partner, Sarah Sohaki, will introduce our guests more fully, but we're delighted today to have Dr. Osili, Sarah as our moderator, and panelists Dr. Anna Pruitt, Renee Cutting, Mike Neal, and Jennifer Barrymore. We're grateful for their participation. I encourage everyone to ask questions via the Q&A or chat feature in Zoom. And now let me introduce our keynote speaker. Dr. Una Osili is the Director of Research at Indiana University's Center on Philanthropy and the Associate Dean for Research and International Programs at the Indiana University Lilly Family School of Philanthropy. She is an economist with significant experience in research and policy in the fields of household behavior and economic policy. An internationally recognized expert on economic development and philanthropy, Dr. Osili speaks across the globe on issues related to national and international trends in economics and philanthropy. Since the fall of 2016, she's led the research and publication of the Index of Global Philanthropy and Remittances and the Index of Philanthropic Freedom. She has also pioneered new approaches to using data to better understand global and national trends in philanthropy with the $1 Million List and the new Generosity for Life project. We're fortunate to have her as our keynote speaker for today's presentation because she also leads the research and publication of Giving USA. Welcome, Dr. Osili.
Good afternoon, good morning, depending on where you're joining. And thank you so much to our colleagues at CCS for their continued partnership. It's truly a delight and an honor to be with all of you. I also want to thank our colleagues on the Giving Institute and Giving USA Foundation side. This is a true collaboration between the Lilly Family School and our colleagues all across the country. And this is also an opportunity to acknowledge and recognize all of you who contribute to this project, starting with our team here at the Lilly Family School, but also our advisory council methodology and several other volunteers who work on this project year-round. Today is really an exciting day because this is a once-a-year event where we announce the results. And as you heard, you are among the first anywhere in the world to hear these results. And we're going to take you behind the scenes, not just with the headlines, but also the whys. The way to describe today's presentation is what's now and what's next. I encourage you throughout this discussion to send in your questions, your comments, and your ideas. We welcome your thoughts, we welcome your feedback, and we learn a lot from these presentations every single year. So as you've heard, Giving USA is the longest and most comprehensive report on American philanthropy. It dates back to 1955, and we are part of a long-standing tradition, not just of measuring American philanthropy, but also recognizing that despite the changes we've experienced, a global pandemic, a racial and social justice movement, and continued economic challenges in 2022, we've also been part of witnessing extraordinary generosity during these turbulent times. And one consistent theme throughout Giving USA's history is the generosity of Americans of all different backgrounds. So with that, I'd like to take you behind the scenes to the numbers. So let's start with the big picture. Without spending any further time, I'd like to tell you what happened in 2022 and what it means in 2023 and beyond. So giving reached $499 billion in 2022. There's a lot to unpack in these numbers. Giving reached nearly, as you can see, $500 billion, but giving actually declined in 2022 at 3.4%. Let's actually put these numbers in context. The good news here is that we have seen record levels of giving during the pandemic. However, 2022 had some very significant challenges, and notably, we had inflation levels reach a 40-year record in 2022. But we also want to celebrate that for the first time, giving reached this close to $500 billion mark during the pandemic. So there's both good news to celebrate, but also some challenges ahead. Now, these numbers are significant. As I have often reflected on these giving numbers, no other nation in the world has the size, the complexity, or even the level of generosity that we see here in the United States. We are fortunate here at the Lilly Family School to study giving around the world. And American philanthropy at nearly 2% of GDP is a leader in many ways. Because this year is so significant, we have also done a lot of comprehensive work to prepare for Giving USA 2023. In particular, we've looked back at other moments in our history. The 1980s and the 1970s were particularly significant because we also had significant inflation during those periods. So let's see how giving has changed over this 40-year period. And in particular, one of the points I think that stood out to our team and to many others who've examined these results is that there are a lot of commonalities between the data in 1982 and also in 2022. In particular, individuals are the lion's share of American philanthropy. However, we've seen the individual segment, which was at over 80% in the 1980s, now fall to 64%. That's the lowest number we have had on record. Individuals are still the largest slice of American philanthropy, but their footprint has been somewhat diminished by the growth in other areas. So if individuals have diminished in their share overall, what has increased? Foundations have seen a significant growth, especially during the 1990s and continuing. Foundations now make up 21% of all giving. And we've also seen charitable bequests maintain, as you can see, roughly 9%. And corporate giving has stayed relatively the same at about 5% in the 80s and 6% currently. Taken together, I want to emphasize that despite what we see as the decline in the role of individuals, if you took the entire individual segment, half of the foundation sector, and all of the charitable bequests component, you would still have 80% or more of all giving, close to 85% of giving that is led and controlled by individuals. So for all of you who are thinking, what does this mean for my work? It means our giving economy is considerably more sophisticated and more complex than it's ever been. Individuals use a range of giving vehicles to make their charitable contributions. However, we also need to understand the role that many giving vehicles play and the role that institutions play in charitable giving. And so I think this is the time to reflect on the generosity of Americans of all backgrounds, and noting that despite some of the common threads through 1982 and today, when we drill down into the individual segment, we note that we have a more diverse nation than we've ever had, and not just diversity in terms of race and ethnicity, but also in terms of age, background, religious orientation, and many other factors. Now, I'd just like to mention charitable bequests remain a very significant element of the philanthropic landscape. As we look at our demographic profile, we are seeing our populations get older, not just here in the United States, but around the world. And many organizations are finding that investing in the bequest component of their giving has the potential to pay significant returns, not just now, but in the future. And then corporate giving, while it seems like the most stable portion of our overall pie chart, it was 5% in the 80s, it's 6% today. We've also seen tremendous change in corporate giving. During the pandemic, many corporations of all different sizes and sectors stepped up their charitable contributions and have continued to invest in the communities that they are established in, where their customers are, where their employees are. We've seen corporations respond not just to the global pandemic, but also to the racial and social justice movement, with many corporations announcing significant commitments to enable racial justice in their communities. In addition, however, corporations are innovating, becoming more strategic in how they allocate their corporate philanthropy dollars. And they're also going into new areas, whether it's impact investing or also cause-based marketing. And we have seen workplace giving take a center stage for many corporations as corporate philanthropy becomes one of or part of the toolkit for employee engagement. So with all that, the big headline, the takeaway here is that giving reached 499, so crossed the $500 billion mark during the pandemic, went down slightly in this current period, but this decline reflects a lot of the economic challenges in 2022 and beyond. For the second big picture takeaway, it's not just that giving declined, it's not just that we crossed the $500 billion mark during the pandemic era, but we are seeing significant shifts in how the giving environment is being distributed and how those charitable dollars are allocated. One of the biggest trends that we have followed over time is the role of religious congregations. In the 1950s and 60s, when Giving USA was first launched and established, 2/3 of charitable giving dollars were allocated to religious congregations, whether those were churches, mosques, synagogues, and so forth. Today, we see that the share of religious congregations in overall giving has declined significantly. It's under 30%. However, congregations still remain the largest recipient of American philanthropy. And when we look at more data on how Americans give and why they give, we know that religious beliefs and religious-oriented nonprofits still play a significant role in all of the subsectors, whether it's arts, the environment, international affairs, education, and many more. In terms of how the overall pie chart is shifting, I want to lift up two subsectors that we pay close attention to. The environment. The environment has grown significantly over the past few decades. We note often that Giving USA did not track the environment and animals back in the 50s and 60s. You cannot find those results for those early volumes of Giving USA. In fact, environment and animal giving to the environment was first inaugurated in 1987. In addition, international affairs now occupy 6% of overall charitable giving. And in this year's report, international giving does have a significant role because of all the crises around the world. And we also note that international giving was such a small segment that it wasn't tracked until 1987. So we've seen shifts taking place, not just in the overall numbers, but also where those dollars are allocated to. I will also mention that human services and education are among the largest subsectors. During the pandemic, both saw significant increases. And in this current report, you'll note that many of the subsectors actually saw declines, not just in nominal terms, but also when we adjust for inflation. And the big news here, if you're trying to interpret the numbers and make sense of them, is just to remember that all of the subsectors are coming off of highs set during the pandemic. And the other factor to keep in mind is that every single subsector is being impacted by the 40-year high we have in inflationary pressures. Many of us may not recall what it was like in the 1970s, but as we drill down into these numbers, organizations, whether they're human service organizations, educational institutions, arts and culture organizations, have all been impacted by the acceleration in prices in 2022 and beyond. So now you have the full picture, the big picture, and all of the details around what happened to giving in 2022. But our job is not done. What I'd like to do now is take you behind the scenes to understand what these numbers mean, what explains the changing landscape, and what this means for your organization and the sector you work in. So let's start with why. Why did giving decline after the pandemic era levels that were set? The simple answer to that question is that over time, we have a wealth of data and evidence that suggests that giving trends are closely linked with economic conditions. We know that households give for many different reasons. They give because they're connected to a cause, because they are asked to give, but we also know that households give when they feel financially and economically secure and when they have the resources to make those commitments. The giving environment in 2022 had some challenges. In particular, as I noted, inflation reached a 40-year high in 2022. It wasn't just the pandemic era conditions and supply chain issues related to the pandemic in 2022, but we also had the war in Ukraine that had put upward pressure on energy prices and food prices. Now, as we look at the numbers, though, I have to pause and also acknowledge that during the pandemic, which is the point that I think we heard at the very beginning, we did see extraordinary generosity. Households at all income levels stepped up their giving, and we saw record levels of giving being established. This is especially worth noting because not only was the environment challenging during the pandemic for many nonprofits, but also there was tremendous need across the board. And seeing that households were able to give in these record numbers was inspiring for us here on the research side of the equation, because we're able to track all the new ways that people were giving, sometimes at a local level, but also to global causes during this time. And now let's go to the fourth finding. As we look at the economic data in 2022, we better understand what happened to the giving numbers. And this gives us insights into not just what's happening in 2022, but what we can expect in 2023 and beyond. Now, as we look at the data, there are some significant economic challenges that remain. Of course, top of the mind is inflation, but the other variable and indicator that I want to lift up is the stock market. Especially towards the end of the year, we saw the stock market decline precipitously. In fact, year over year, the stock market, financial markets, when adjusted for inflation, declined by over 20%. We also note that disposable income declined slightly in 2022. So these are the perhaps not so positive indicators. However, on the, I'd say the side of the equation, the brighter spots of the economy, there's several indicators that we can point to. The job market remained quite strong. In fact, unemployment was at record lows. So this is the contrast with what we saw in the financial markets. GDP also grew in 2022. So we have a mixed set of indicators for 2022, and some of this persists even in 2023 and beyond. We have noted that we've continued to see higher inflation rates than we've seen in the past. And also we've continued to see quite a bit of volatility in the stock market and many other financial measures. However, for those of you who are thinking, what does this mean for my fundraising goals, for my plans for 2023 and beyond? Keep in mind that the labor market has proved to be very resilient, and the American consumer has also proved to show a great deal of resilience. What this all means for you and your organization is pay attention to these economic indicators. You can't obviously track all of them, but if you had to track just a few, I would look at the stock market variables as well as what's happening with prices and income, simply because all of this affects how households navigate their own personal financial and economic circumstances, and they're more likely to give when they have a degree of confidence about their own economic situation. And in general, uncertainty does have a dampening effect on charitable giving decisions. So let's turn to some of the bright spots as well as some of the challenges in the giving landscape. So I'll say that on the bright spots, we'll start with corporations and foundations. During the pandemic, it wasn't just corporate giving that we saw that step up take place. We saw foundations also increase their payout rates in some cases and make significant changes, not just to their overall giving, but how they made those giving decisions with more unrestricted giving models, trust-based philanthropy gaining ground, and many foundations increasing their commitment to the causes they care about. So when we look over this 2-year period, we see that corporate and foundation giving experienced positive 2-year growth. So that's really the good news here. If I had to say where the challenges are for the giving landscape, it's really on the individual side. We've seen a lot about individual giving during the pandemic. But more, I think importantly, we've also been able to drill down into those individual giving numbers and see which segments of giving have some challenges. Here at the Lilly Family School, we have the philanthropy panel study that tracks the same households over time. You can find out more about that on our Generosity for Life website. And this is where we've seen that participation rates in giving have been falling since the Great Recession from more than 2/3 of American households giving at the start of the 21st century to today less than half. So if I had to issue a challenge and also a call for today's presentation, it's that we as a sector need to think about and work towards increasing the fraction of American households who engage in philanthropy. Philanthropy has been a consistent part of our nation's history even before it was founded. And we as the sector also need to make sure that we continue to build inclusion and make sure that households of all different backgrounds can participate. So let me try to summarize what the opportunities and challenges are as we navigate this changing economic landscape. Our team every year pours through the Giving USA data. Once we have the final numbers, we spend countless days, months, and hours looking through all of the data points and trying to identify what this means for the sector, not just for 2022 and 2023, but even looking ahead. So I'd like to share what those findings are. What we have identified as both an opportunity for the sector and also a challenge is how to ensure that the individual segment of philanthropy continues to grow. When we look over time, we can see very clearly that individuals remain the lion's share of American philanthropy. In the past year, giving for individuals actually declined. And when we adjust for inflation, it's even a greater decline. What has kept a lot of the giving numbers looking quite strong has been the contribution of large gifts by high net worth individuals, which represent about 5% of all individual giving for the second year in a row. These mega gifts have been a big part of the giving story. This includes gifts by McKinsey Scott, $6 billion alone in 2020, and many of those gifts were given with an equity focus, were completely unrestricted, and were inspiring in the impact they had on the organizations that received them. However, what we've also seen in that individual segment is the fact that we are seeing fewer households participating in the philanthropic sector. We describe this as donors are down, but dollars are up, or at least holding steady. So the opportunity that lies ahead is to continue to grow the individual segment. It is still the lion's share of American philanthropy, and to ensure that the sector remains healthy, we will have to continue to engage individuals of all different backgrounds. When we look at the data, we also recognize that individuals represent the most diverse segment of American philanthropy, individuals of all different ages and backgrounds, races and ethnic backgrounds as well. And so the sector will have to engage all of these individuals to ensure that the individual segment continues to grow. Another indicator that we have tracked for the past several years, actually beginning during the Great Recession, we started to see this number decline. Individual giving has more or less been at around 2% of charitable giving. Individual giving, marked as a percentage of disposable income, in 2022 was 1.7%. So the challenge for all of us is, as we look at the data on other aspects of consumption, we've seen growth in how much Americans allocate to their food consumption, their technology consumption, and many other buckets of consumption. But the charitable giving segment has hovered around 2%. So the question for all of us, and I count myself in this number, is what would we have to do differently to move this above 2%? And you can see that in this environment where individual giving has faced some challenges, we will have to think about, is there a role for public policy here? Is there something that the nonprofit sector can do to inspire more giving? And is there a role for all of us as individuals to ensure that this variable that is strictly an individual giving variable continues to grow over time? And now let's turn to, as I mentioned, one of the bright spots in this year's report. And throughout the pandemic era, we saw giving by corporations show relative strength. That was also true of foundations. Many of them stepped up in their giving. Corporations in this year's report actually had the strongest growth rate in current dollars, as well as adjusted for inflation. And when we look at corporate giving as a percentage of pre-tax profits, we see that that number hasn't grown very much over time. And I will show very quickly, as someone who has tracked this number very closely, what we've seen over time is that in the 1970s, this number was much higher. In fact, many companies were giving about 2% of corporate pre-tax profits to their charitable causes. You've seen some growth in this number over time, but more recently, it has started to fall and it stayed below 1%. So the same challenge, I think, can be issued here. What would have to be different? Is it a policy question? Is it something that individual companies will have to take on? Or is there a role for all of us as consumers to perhaps push for more of corporate giving to be distributed to nonprofit organizations? Now, keep in mind, though, there has been a lot of change in how companies support nonprofits and causes. In the past, perhaps 20 or 30 years ago, many companies primarily gave through their corporate foundations or through direct contributions to nonprofit organizations. Increasingly, though, we see corporations using a range of vehicles, just like individuals. We're seeing some companies set up LLC functions where they are able to give not just to nonprofits, but also to businesses, small businesses. During the pandemic, some large companies made direct grants to not just to nonprofits, but also to small businesses, especially Black and Brown entrepreneurs. We've seen companies participate in nonprofit partnerships and sponsorships. Some of them are marketing related and do not count as corporate philanthropy. Similarly, in addition to some of the items we've mentioned, corporate giving is becoming perhaps more difficult to track because we have lots of new models that have emerged. Many of you know about the cause marketing campaigns, but we have companies like Tom's Shoes where you buy a pair and another pair is donated. And that has become a very attractive model. And increasingly, we see that for younger Americans, buying from certain companies is part of their philanthropic contribution. And so this is what we call conscious consumption. Increasingly, though, corporate giving is not just the dollars that flow through the corporate foundation, but they include this larger bucket of corporate philanthropy and corporate investment, as well as corporate social responsibility and sustainability. So taken together, it's becoming more difficult to track, but the question still remains, how can we as consumers, as people who support the nonprofit sector, what can we do to ensure that corporations continue to allocate the share, and the share does not decline over time. I also want to emphasize that many corporations have become more strategic in their philanthropy, which means it's much, perhaps there are opportunities to partner with companies in new ways, not just through the corporate philanthropy bucket, but also through the marketing, sponsorships, cause marketing, and many other types of partnerships. As we look at the data, our team, as I mentioned, spends quite a bit of time also highlighting where the growth opportunities are. In 2022, we did see that giving to international affairs was one of the bright spots, one of the strong performers for this particular period. And giving to international affairs was influenced by some of the crises we saw in 2022, in particular, the humanitarian crisis following the war in Ukraine has led to significant commitments by individuals, both high net worth individuals and everyday donors, to giving to Ukraine. We've also seen international organizations innovate to meet some of these challenges, including implementing monthly subscription donor programs and online giving models that allow individuals at all different income levels to participate. In addition to the war in Ukraine, there have been a number of other international events that have been closely followed by the media, which have led to ongoing giving to international affairs. In addition, giving to foundations has also grown. Both of those subsectors have reached the highest level on record, even after adjusting for inflation. As we turn our attention to other both bright spots and challenges ahead, we note that giving to religion, health, and arts and culture also grew in current dollars. However, after adjusting for inflation, giving to those subsectors declined. We're spending some time on this because all of these three subsectors actually reached their highest inflation-adjusted levels during the pandemic era. And this is especially worth noting because arts and culture organizations face significant challenges during the COVID pandemic. Many of them saw loss in earned income because they had to shut down their venues or pivot to virtual and online performances and audiences. So there was significant shifting and I'd say innovation required within the arts and culture segment. Similarly, religious congregations also face significant challenges during the pandemic. Many of them had to figure out how to offer services online because of the COVID pandemic. So there has been some recovery for religion, for healthcare, and arts and culture. Health organizations also depended, perhaps to a larger degree, on in-person fundraising events. Many of the runs and walks that are organized by health-related organizations were forced to reinvent their models during the pandemic. So we are, I'd say, encouraged to see that all three subsectors reached their highest inflation-adjusted levels, so they were able to recover. And all those two subsectors posted strong two-year growth, even when adjusted for inflation. So I don't know how many of you are tuning in from those subsectors, but here we're seeing that there was strong growth. And when adjusted for inflation, we don't necessarily see that growth hold up, but there is also good news embedded in these results because these subsectors were particularly hard hit by the challenges associated with the COVID-19 pandemic. And then as we look at the next group of findings, this is an opportunity to really reflect on where we've been. Many of us in the sector have had to learn new skills during this era, whether it's online events, virtual engagement, or just adopting a new mindset that requires us to shift to the times. Navigating this changing landscape is going to require continued innovation. We've heard a lot about the resilience of the sector. Many were not sure how nonprofits would weather the storm. I think the moment here with the data in hand is to see that many organizations, in fact, the majority of the organizations were able to move through many of these changes and emerge with new business models, new ideas, and invigorated leadership. And so as we look at the future of giving, I think there are really some moments to be inspired and celebrate the role of philanthropy and nonprofits in American society. As we reflect on the numbers, the overall headline that giving reached nearly $500 billion. We also note from a new study conducted by the Lilly Family School and just released in the last few months that we hear a lot of news about declining trust in many institutions and the polarization many feel in communities across this country. However, as we look at those numbers, one note that we also want to share that is both encouraging and inspiring is that nonprofits are trusted more than any other entity. So when we look at nonprofit trust, 40% of Americans trust nonprofits completely or very much. And this is in contrast to the extremely low levels of trust in state and local governments, the federal government institutions, large corporations, and even branches of government like the Supreme Court have seen their numbers decline over time. What this means is that nonprofits have a vital role to play in their communities, in bringing people together, in working towards the public good, and ensuring that we continue to build a sense of community. As we think about what philanthropy actually means, the word itself means the love of mankind. And I think this is a time to really reflect on how nonprofits can continue to build the trust and build the confidence that people have in their society and in each other. As we look ahead, there are enormous changes on the horizon, but there's also a lot to celebrate in the resilience and innovation that many nonprofits have developed during the pandemic era. One area to continue to expand in is online giving. During the pandemic, we saw giving reach and exceed 10% of all giving. This was the very first time. Online giving will continue to grow. When we look at younger donors, we see that many of them prefer to give online and use many online tools, social media tools, to actually make their contributions. One data point that I think I have been completely convinced by is that when we look at giving via social media and even via crowdfunding, we have nearly 40% of Americans giving via those tools. So this is a bit of an inflection point in terms of online giving. Building the future pipeline of donors is going to be an important task ahead for many nonprofits. When we look at the data from our new study on what Americans think about philanthropy, we note that for many younger donors and also for diverse donors, the notion of philanthropy has continued to expand. It is not just the 3 T's, giving time, giving talent, and giving treasure, but it has also expanded to include giving testimony, sharing your voice, using your platform to bring more attention to the causes you care about, and connections, ties, building ties between organizations. What this means is in this new era, nonprofits also need to expand how they engage donors using all of the tools that are available. And many of those new tools we are just starting to learn about. Tools like ChatGPT offer new possibilities for fundraisers, for nonprofits, and for donor engagement. However, they come with their challenges. Philanthropy relies on trust, as we've noted. Trust is the glue that holds the sector together. And many of these tools both can create more impersonal relationships. I tend to be an optimist, and I do see a lot of potential in the tools like artificial intelligence, but I also note the limitations of these tools, in particular in this era of information and lots of disintermediation taking place. Many organizations will need to build those authentic relationships with their donors. The last point I will draw on here as we reflect on the Giving USA numbers and the opportunities that lie ahead, I also want to call out another data point from our What Americans Think About Philanthropy. And there we noted that only about 5% of American households can identify the role that nonprofits play in their communities. When asked, you or anyone you know, has anyone you know been helped by a nonprofit? Only about 5% say that they have been helped or someone they know has received assistance. What this means is that nonprofits need to do a much better job in telling their story, in sharing how they impact their community, in engaging their audiences, both at the local level, as well as if they have a global mission, sharing it with global networks as well. So in closing, I'd just like to once again thank all of you for joining us today. You've seen the very top 10 findings from Giving USA 2023. You've heard it here from all of us here at the Lilly Family School. We'd also like to hear from you. What are the top trends you see? Are there any surprises in the data? You have access to the question answer widget. We will share responses to your questions in real time on Zoom. And we're also always very happy to hear from all of our Giving USA audiences. So feel free to drop us a line or send a question. And with that, I'd like to turn it back to our moderator.
Thanks so much, Una, for sharing the latest data with us. We have a lot to talk about today. So I'm pleased to reintroduce our esteemed panelists from across the philanthropic community for this discussion. So I ask that you please join me in welcoming Dr. Anna Pruitt, who currently serves as the managing editor of Giving USA at the Indiana University Lilly Family School of Philanthropy. So in addition to serving as managing editor for the longest running annual report on charitable giving in the United States, Anna also works on the Philanthropy Outlook, a report that projects charitable giving for 2 years and explains how economic variables impact those projections. Thanks to her work on these reports, Anna has a special perspective on the most pressing topics for donors, fundraisers, and nonprofit leaders right now, as well as the concerns on the horizon. Anna joined the Indiana University Lilly Family School of Philanthropy in March 2017 after serving as an assistant research professor in the School of Liberal Arts at Indiana University, Purdue University, Indianapolis. Anna earned a PhD in English from the University of California, Davis, and has dedicated her career to translating complex research into insights that practitioners can put into action. Welcome, Anna. We are also joined by Jennifer Barrymore, who is the Vice President of Advancement Resources at Northeastern University. Jennifer specializes in building business strategies for philanthropic missions, specifically focusing on the utilization of data and technology. Prior to joining Northeastern University, Jennifer was the Associate Vice President of Operations and Administrative Services at Morehouse College and the Senior Director of Prospect Development and Donor Strategy for Michigan State University. She also recently received confirmation on her appointment to the Case Commission on Philanthropy. Jennifer earned her bachelor's degree from DePaul University in marketing and spent time at Tuskegee University in their marketing program. She also earned her MBA from Michigan State University. Great to have you with us, Jennifer. We also welcome Mike Neal, who is the Chief of Organizational Advancement at American Cancer Society Incorporated. In his role, Mike oversees all aspects of resource generation for the American Cancer Society and ensures the incorporation of national, regional, and local strategies for staff and volunteers to leverage the organization's inherent strengths to achieve mission goals. Mike joined the American Cancer Society in 1996 as vice president of the Western Pennsylvania region, and in his tenure with the organization has also served as senior executive vice president of field operations and executive vice president and operating officer of the American Cancer Society's East Central Division. His leadership led to the development of a new field structure, moving from a unit county-based model to a region model. Prior to joining the American Cancer Society, Mike served as the executive director of the Pittsburgh AIDS Task Force, as a public health advisor for the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, and worked as a social program administrator with the Ohio Department of Health. Mike is a graduate of Edinburgh State University. Welcome, Mike. And we are also joined by Renee Cutting, who is the Chief Philanthropy Officer at UNICEF USA. Renee leads an energetic team of 170 fundraising professionals to relentlessly pursue a more equitable world for children through strategic partnerships with individuals, corporations, foundations, and civil society organizations. In her inaugural year, the Philanthropy Division raised more than $1 billion in philanthropic revenue for UNICEF USA, and working to ensure every child is educated, healthy, protected, and respected. Renee's tenure at leading institutions includes the NAACP Legal Defense and Educational Fund, where she launched its first comprehensive campaign and helped to raise LDF's brand through high-profile partnerships and celebrity events. Prior to LDF, she spearheaded programs at Horizons National, Mount Sinai, Ralph Lauren Center for Cancer Care and Prevention, and Memorial Sloan Kettering Cancer Center. Before embarking on a career in development, Renee was an English instructor at Phillips Exeter and a Harvard University Administrative Fellow at the Division of Public Health Practice. A native of Barbados, Renee holds a master's degree in education from Harvard University and a Bachelor of Arts degree in English and American Literature from New York University. So quite the esteemed group of panelists to join us today. Thank you all for being with us. And I'd love to lead us off with some questions about just general reactions to this year's Giving USA report. And so would open this to anyone who would like to take the floor to begin with, but curious if there's anything surprising for you in this year's results. And if there were surprises, what were they that stuck out to you?
I'll kick it off, Sarah.
Great, thanks, Renee.
First and foremost, on behalf of my incredible colleagues at UNICEF USA and UNICEF Globally, I just really want to extend my sincerest appreciation to you and the CCS team for inviting me to be a part of this esteemed group of participant panelists. Also, thanks to Dr. Osili for that excellent presentation and all the important research that you lead at the Lilly Family School of Philanthropy. I am truly excited to be in conversation with all of you as we discuss the insights on the state of philanthropy from our respective vantage points. At UNICEF USA, we raise money to support UNICEF's global work for children in more than 190 countries and territories. And we have certainly witnessed, as the report says, a significant increase, specifically over 200%. In support of the world's most vulnerable children. For us, this surge was largely in response to both our work to equitably vaccinate the world against COVID-19 and the emergencies precipitated by the war in Ukraine, which led to record contributions from our individuals and institutional philanthropy partners. So our experience definitely mirrors, if not far exceeded, the 10.9% growth in giving to international organizations and the 29% growth seen since 2020 in current dollars. We also noted similar trends in growth with the foundation as well as corporate giving, but unlike the trends highlighted in the Giving USA report, our individual giving grew by 94%. That represents the entire continuum of individual giving from our direct response or major giving and our principal giving channel. numbers. And I'm happy to dive in later to talk about the drivers behind those numbers. But yes, in summary, the data is used by our philanthropy team. We have a best-in-class data and insights team, and we annually dedicate time to really share out the important findings that this report has. So I'm really excited to be with you all in conversation and further discuss how we can lift this up in all of our efforts. Over.
Renee, thank you so much for those insights. Congratulations on a heck of a year. And we definitely are going to come back to those drivers. I noticed a couple of folks came off mute as Renee was concluding her remarks. Other areas that either folks found a surprise or affirming from this year's Giving USA report?
Sir, I'll jump in. The only surprise I saw, and it's not actually that big of a surprise, is the overall decline in revenue in 2022 compared to 21. Dr. Osili, I think a lot of what you said really aligns to the experience we've had. But we did see incremental growth in 2022. We did see a big post-COVID jump in 2021 that really helped us. And then, of course, it raised the bar for all of us, right? So we had to see that growth and work a little bit harder to pull that revenue in. The one thing that when I think about the long trends for us, corporate development over the course of several years has continued to grow for us. We've seen corporate engagement get more sophisticated. So as you spoke about corporations wanting to invest more in an organization, have partnerships with an organization, that is clearly things that we've recognized over the last several years. What is really different, though, is our individual giving from larger donors. And of course, we all have a different definition of that. But our larger donors grew significantly since 2019. In fact, it doubled for us. But a lot of that, I think, has to do with the investment we made in that area. We began to redefine and create a more balanced revenue mix over the last few years to ensure that we were able to be less dependent on any one revenue area. Dr. Osili, you mentioned the events that organizations were impacted in 2020. We were clearly one of them. We have been a big performer in the event space for years. Overly dependent, I think, at one point. COVID really gave us that nudge we needed to move to digital platforms much more quickly. And we saw significant growth in that over the first year. And then it started to become less growth simply because I think it became a more crowded space. A lot of other nonprofits realized they had to move into that area as well. So those are the things that I think are very, that your report complements what we've seen. The individual giving, however, from larger donors for us went up. We're seeing the number of donors from like direct mail and stuff start to go down, but their individual gifts might have gone up a little bit. So larger gifts, fewer gifts, larger impact.
Terrific. Thanks, Michael. Anna, I see you came off mute. Over to you.
Yes, I'm so eager to talk about the findings, especially because I've been looking at this data for a long time. I'm so glad we can finally share it with the world. I've been having to keep it a secret for too long, it feels like. So I just really wanted to highlight something that I think Una did a great job of covering in her presentation, which is really that dampening effect of inflation almost universally on our data. It just bears repeating. 8% inflation. For the last 40 years, our average was between 2 and 3%. So really, when we look at the results, and I actually saw a couple of questions about this, we see growth in current dollars for 3 of 4 sources, and honestly, 5 of 9 of our recipient categories, but that dampening effect of inflation really turns things negative for all of our sources and the majority of our nonprofits. And really, when you think about this, most Americans are not used to seeing inflation rates this high. I'm one of them. I had not lived through this, and we may not have had people respond to that inflation. So for instance, if you're used to giving $100 to your food pantry every single year, you may not have said, like, I better look at the consumer price index and find out, how far that money is going to go in 2022 compared to 2021. You probably just made the same donation that you did the year before, but we know that the purchasing power of that annual gift actually went down. So even if it seems like giving was the same, it's a loss when we adjust for inflation. So for me, just the sort of broadly dampening of effect of inflation is something we knew it was happening. We knew it was coming, but to me, it's a fairly dramatic effect. And it's just something that bears repeating when we look at the results for this year.
Thanks so much, Anna. And then Jennifer, I'm curious from your role at Northeastern, if you look at the data for the previous year, were there any truths that were reaffirmed from that report for you from your experience?
First, thank you for having me. I have to agree with Michael and Renee both. I'm just actually looking at some of the numbers. Our principal giving, our $1 million donors, and major giving donors went up. Our overall giving is up, but I do see the decline in our corporate and foundation giving. So that's consistent. I also have to agree with some of the trends and some of the strategies that you have to adapt to the diversity of your alumni and your donor base. It requires a lot more innovation, a lot more specific and intentional engagement in order to broaden that donor base. So that's some of the things that we're working on as well.
Terrific. Well, I would like to talk a bit more about, each of you touched on sort of the current climate for philanthropy in various ways and offering your initial observations. And so Renee, I promised we would come back to you on wanting to understand those drivers for the growth. So let's talk a bit more about them. What strategies or initiatives have you seen that have been most impactful in driving the kinds of growth that you've seen at UNICEF?
Yeah, I think it's important to really focus in on the moment that we're in and that we operated in. It's clear to us, specifically from our vantage point, that children today face what we call a polycrisis. We've been framing this polycrisis to our supporters, and it really pivots around three specific areas: conflict, COVID, and climate. And it helps us think about how we connect our mission to our donors. So as I noted, we did have a record-breaking funding and support that we garnered this year. These results were primarily bolstered by UNICEF's response to the pandemic in 2022. We were the implementing partner with Gavi, the Vaccine Alliance, and COVAX facility to vaccinate more than 2 billion people against COVID-19, with a focus on low to middle income countries. And UNICEF specifically was tapped because we annually vaccinate some 45% of children across the world who are under 5. And we have the infrastructure and we have the scale, the expertise to vaccinate the world. So as a result, we were really showing our donors that message, and it came to life with our innovative End the Pandemic campaign that we implemented, which raised over $267 million in less than 18 months. In addition, we saw a tremendous increase from our foundation partners and corporate partners, as Dr. Osili mentioned, who, as well as over 140 new donors who came to support the organization during this period. It was also referenced in regards to the role that religious organizations partner. And I think it's important for us to really diversify our funding base. And we also launched an interfaith movement to end the pandemic. And that was a strong indicator of getting support from different communities and our faith-based partners. We did see record 8-figure gifts from both the principal giving, foundations, and organizations, and corporate partnerships also stepped up in a major way, as well as it was highlighted specifically around workplace giving. And we all know that gifts of all sizes matter, and our direct response program also saw record gifts. And most importantly, I think it is important, it was mentioned earlier, the cost of inflation significantly impacted the work of our direct response team. Direct mail costs has soared, as well as just all of the digital ad placements in order to garner that support. On the heels of the pandemic, the world's eyes also turned toward the war in Ukraine. And UNICEF also had an outside role to play during that period. It was an emergency, unlike any emergency that we've ever seen. In the span of 10 months, we've raised over $250 million and also brought in over 300 new donors during this period. I think In addition to all of that, it also, the core work that we do, what was happening around polio, that also had a significant impact as many people were zeroing in on the war in Ukraine, as well as our ongoing efforts. We also saw that with the decline in childhood immunization coverage, exacerbated by years leading up to that, we also saw significant support from the Gates Foundation and Rotary, really to support our polio funding. And we saw an over 218% increase specifically to support that as well. So we all know that we have to continue to reimagine and remain agile during this turbulent economy. As the reports indicates, there is a decline in individual giving. However, we really have to continue to partner with our funders to support that. So those are some of the notable ways that UNICEF USA significantly engaged with our donors during this record-breaking giving in this evolving landscape change. And we're working on both life-saving as well as the world-changing moments to meet this moment.
Hear, hear, Renee. Thanks for that overview. And I want to go a little bit deeper then on a point that you raised and that also Mike and Jennifer brought forward of this feeling of some softening in different donor pools, of seeing some declines in a few places, but this consistent trend of from some of your larger supporters, particularly individuals, seeing giving continue to increase. And so Una, want to think about the research perspective. Did you find any other evidence that further supported this lived experience from these different organizations? And if so, how do you think this will impact the philanthropic landscape down the line?
Well, first of all, thank you to all our panelists. I have so enjoyed and appreciated the perspectives that you bring. And also to all of you who are on the Zoom webinar today, the number of questions we've received is really amazing. When we look at the data, I think it's worth noting that the average donor, the everyday donor, is where we're seeing some of that softening take place, not necessarily in the high net worth or affluent donor space. And if you look further into those numbers, there are two groups that really stand out. It is the lower income, lower education. We call it sort of the diploma divide in other spheres, but we're seeing it in charitable giving too. And another pool of donors that I think concerns me and a lot of our colleagues here at the school is that we see younger donors are less likely to give, and they also give lower levels, even adjusted for inflation and income and so forth, than their parents or grandparents at the same point in their life cycle. What this means is that we also need to think about not just, of course, engaging our current donors, but building that future pipeline and making it easier, lowering barriers for donors of all different backgrounds. I'm thrilled to hear about the work taking place at UNICEF, American Cancer Society, and Northeastern to engage that diverse segment, because that's really what we are seeing from the research, that younger donors are the ones that are expressing kind of that disconnect with a lot of nonprofits, may not have the tools available. Some of them are used to giving via electronic means, and the nonprofits don't have PayPal or Venmo or some of these other platforms that they are accustomed to using for their other consumption and purchase decisions. So the phrase that I often use is we need to meet donors where they are. And for those younger donors, we need to engage them in spaces where they are already.
Thanks for that, Una. And then, Mike, you'd mentioned, certainly in your background with American Cancer Society, there's been a lot of evolution in terms of how the organization thinks of your approach to donors. And we'd imagine that also translates to individual donor conversations and how the tone and tenor of them have also shifted. Would welcome your thoughts on any highlights or keynotes that you've seen related to shifts specifically in this current philanthropic environment.
Yeah, great to share. And I think, Una, your point about young people, we specifically know to have a conversation with younger people, you really need to be where they are. And engaging younger people is a different strategy than we have in the past. We are working with folks so that we're connecting them in more transactional ways to build relationships and to build affinity to the work that we do. And that takes time. But what we're finding overall with donor conversations is that I think our donors, particularly our high net worth individuals, are asking more of the nonprofit. They're wanting to know, what are you doing with the dollars that I'm investing with you? And so when you're having conversations with them, we're leading with the mission work. And this is the obvious thing that everyone on this call is probably saying, duh, Mike, yeah, we know that, but always leading with mission, because the work that you do, no matter what we do, whether it's UNICEF or the American Cancer Society or others, you're making a difference in the lives of the people you serve, right? And so we need to be having those conversations with our donors, telling them about the good work that we're doing, giving them ideas and understanding of the impact that they make with their gifts. And I also know that through the conversations we're having with corporations, they're being much more socially responsible today. They're making investments in their communities, and an organization like the American Cancer Society, the impact that a very large gift can have in the fight against cancer is significant. It can make a big change in the course of a particular way that we would do research and the discovery that we would have in the research work we do. And then the ability to reach underserved communities is more important today than it's ever been. Making sure that folks get access to care, folks get access to the latest technology. For us, it's biomarker testing, it's clinical trial accessibility, making sure that everyone gets access to the same quality of care and service. And so when we have these conversations with donors, we're talking about that and that huge impact, because it will make a bigger impact when we invest in those that need us most. And they're listening, and they're asking those questions. They're challenging us, frankly, to make sure that we're delivering on what we say. And that's the shift that I'm seeing, Sarah.
And I could chime in, Sarah, as well. I do think that my background is prospective research. So if you look at the way we prospect our donors, there's a certain demographic that we always look at, which is basically a white male in the age of 50. So there's many things that cause that to change. The millennials are more entrepreneurial. So they gain wealth earlier. And so, but that information is not going to be available in the public data. So that means you have to use grassroots strategies and build relationships with individuals within your constituency in order to help identify them. There are several things to piggyback off what Michael said. Our alumni relations team currently works with seniors for philanthropy. They have they do trainings, they have ambassadors that work with them so they understand philanthropy before they leave this university. There's also a lot of strategies working with our young alumni. And something that I'm working with our underrepresented group is building a village of belonging so that we can meet them where they are. When I first arrived at the university, I went to the Black Alumni Weekend, and a lot of times what I'm finding is our most diverse populations do not have a strong affinity to the university. However, they want to support students that look like them to make sure that they do not go through the same things they went through when they were here 30, 40 years ago. So that's something we're broadening out, building up this village. And as we expand and we're more global, we've had events in Ghana this recent year where we've reached out to our alumni base. So we've identified places and engaging individuals where they are to, one, re-engage them by the university, to reconnect them with each other and identify things that are their passions that they want to support. So that's one of the things. And then also making sure we're managing the data. And you talked about Venmo. We added the capability to do Venmo giving on Giving Day. So there's a lot that we do. And I'm in the process of a technology implementation strategy, which will allow even more robust opportunities to give on site. So there's a lot of things with the data and the technology that we have to make sure that we're moving along with what's happening in industries. I think working in higher ed, we've always kind of been the leaders, best in breed. We have our tools, but I think you have to look at industry standards, especially being a global institution. What makes sense for a global university that has a campus in London, that has Toronto, that has it all across the country? So those are some things think about how you're managing your data, honoring the GDP guidelines, as well as making sure you're able to meet people where they are, how they want to give. I had a former colleague that always referenced it as the Amazon experience. How are we making it easy for them to give, to connect and engage?
Terrific notes, Jennifer, on the importance and integration of technology. And I want to come back to this idea that you and Mike both had put forward about leaning into mission is really being a key area. And recognizing education in particular took a bit of a hit when we look at the results from giving year over year. So curious, when you think about how you present and prioritize newer pressing needs versus evergreen needs at Northeastern, how does that conversation unfold for you?
Well, I think if you think about building the infrastructure, so I arrived in the midst of COVID and I moved here February 21. So you had a lot of time to do a lot of different things. But if you don't have a infrastructure that allows you to be agile and to pivot to different strategies, you won't be successful. And that was what I set out and planned out, which is what we're launching this year with our new CRM, which will allow for online giving. Long-term goal is to have self-service capability. So now that I have this and some of the things I've implemented, we've been able to move on a dime and change on a dime with different strategies. Because if your technology is outdated and doesn't allow for you to be able to change, you're not going to make it. But I'm also able to plan forward because I can pivot, as well as I make sure my staff and my technology team attend industry workshops to understand what are for-profit companies doing? How are they managing their websites? How are they communicating? What are your marketing communication tools that you're using? So if you stay on top of what's happening in technology and don't stay in the same box of this is how we've always done it, you'll be able to take care of current and your past, your immediate needs, your current, and then your long-term planning.
The importance of technology can't be overstated. And it's only going to continue to evolve as we look to the future in ways that we might guess and ways that we certainly don't know yet.
And let me just interject. It's not just the technology, it's really the data. So the issue is the data. You can't ask me to provide something for you that was never tracked. So if you don't have, it's, the old saying, garbage in, garbage out, but you can't ask me what's the demographics of our constituents if you've never tracked that. So you have to go and understanding what is the story you want to be able to tell, and then how are you going to, then you'll be able to tell that story. And the technology is used just to be able to make it easily accessible and not, the technology doesn't win, it's your processes and your people. So I just had to put that in for my operations side.
So well said, a critical piece of the fundraising machine as we think about it. Well, as we look to the future, certainly want to take a moment to think about what are some of these key takeaways that we should all take with us as we head into the second half of 2023. And so Una and Anna, would turn it to the two of you. If you had to pick one trend or data point for us to really watch in the coming year, what would you suggest we focus on?
I would say there's a lot to focus on, but I would say start with individuals, build those relationships, understand your donors. With all the technology, all the information, all the tools that we have available to us, individuals are still the lion's share of American philanthropy, and authentic engagement using all of these tools alongside building trust in the communities that you work in. I think individuals are still the biggest slice. And when we add the half of the foundation segment, and even within the corporate world, there's still individuals making those decisions. So it comes back to the power of individuals in American philanthropy. That's what I would lean into going forward.
I would just highlight, as Una has already mentioned, it's important to keep looking at what are the economic conditions of the year. We know that there are relationships there. And one really hopeful thing is that the labor market is still really, really strong. That might mean that some households still have funds to give to charity, despite the otherwise, unusual economic aspects. And I think something that we heard from all of the speakers today is that fundraising is getting more sophisticated, not less sophisticated, and donors are getting more sophisticated, not less sophisticated. So there were a lot of questions in the Q&A about where funds from DAFs are going. That's a great question. We have all that information in the Giving USA report. We do net out those gifts, and we actually have a special chapter on donor advised funds that I'd like to encourage people to check out. One of the key takeaways is that there are $234 billion in assets held by donor advised funds. So love them or hate them, you need to get used to it. And I think another thing that we see here is that older Americans have more assets and more wealth, according to the recent SCF data. So thanks to the sophistication in giving, and they have actually more ways than ever to deploy those assets. Two quick examples I just want to mention. Free Will reported a 390% increase in the total number of gifts coming from qualified charitable distributions from IRAs from 2019 to 2021. Those are huge numbers. Those cannot be ignored. We're also seeing designating charity as the beneficiary of a life insurance policy becoming an increasingly popular way to give. So donors are getting more and more sophisticated, but you have to have the conversation first and foremost. That part never changes year over year. According to lots of thought leaders, that's actually going to be one of the top takeaways once AI goes large, is that it's going to make personal touch and those one-to-one conversations even more valuable.
Thanks so much for that, Anna. So the importance of relationships, meeting your donors where they are, both geographically and in terms of their giving relationship with giving as a whole, prioritizing data, and then thinking about the tools that we can implement to leverage that good data, all important things as we move ahead. Want to thank all of our panelists today just for engaging in this conversation, which we know is going to continue as the year unfolds. And we so value and appreciate your partnership and participation. As we conclude our conversation today, the recording from this webinar will be distributed via email following the session, as will the presentation materials. We'll also then be in touch with some answers to the many, many good, thoughtful questions that came through for the chat, so stay tuned on that. But on behalf of CCS Fundraising, the Lilly Family School of Philanthropy, and all our presenters and panelists, thank you so much for joining today.